In my previous video, which is part 1 of the same topic, we discussed about India being rich and self-sufficient before the British rule, and how the British systematically destroyed the world-famous Indian handicrafts market as well as exploited the Indian farmer. In case you missed it, do watch it here, the links above as well as in the description below. Well, Imperialism had converted some of the richest countries of the world into the poorest, and unfortunately India was one of them. Apart from heavy taxation and the illogical land revenue systems, the stagnation in agricultural productivity was also due to overcrowding, lack of modernization of agriculture, low levels of technology, lack of irrigation facilities, negligible use of fertilizers, and a complete neglect of agricultural education. At a time when agriculture all over the world was getting modernized and revolutionized with the rise of new technology and innovation, Indian agriculture remained backward and stagnant, and agriculture was considered the backbone of Indian economy. Moreover, we had those oppressive and exploitative British policies of controlling prices. Just like how weavers were forced to sell his produce at very low rates, regardless of loss or not, farmers too were forced to do the same. At best, he could just break even from the interest of his debts. Not debts, but only his interests, leaving nothing for him and his family. The net result of all this was extreme poverty. Throughout the British rule, the common man suffered from oppression, exploitation, and worst, starvation. Well, the British exploitation, decay of the existing domestic industries, lack of modern industries and technology, high taxation, and backward agrarian structure, all this gradually reduced the Indian people to extreme poverty and prevented them from progressing. India's colonial economy remained stagnated at very low levels. GDP hovered at only 0.5% at its best. Famines was a direct outcome of such low productivity and lack of investment, and millions of people lost their lives during such famines. The quantity of food available to an average Indian declined by as much as 29% in 30 years between 1911 and 1941. You see, an important point to be noted here is that despite the British looting away as much as they could, there was absolutely no dearth of natural resources in India. India represented the paradox of poor people living in a rich country. The scarcity, famines, and poverty were entirely man-made, and it was truly due to the exploitation and backwardness created by greedy British policies that led to such extreme conditions. As a matter of fact, until the 1760s, there was not much difference in the standard of living between India and Britain. It was only after 1757, after the Battle of Plassey, that the drain of wealth began. When company servants began to carry home massive fortunes extorted from Indian rulers, zamindars, merchants, and common people. They sent home nearly £6 million between 1758 and 1765. This amount was as huge as 4 times that of total land revenue collected by the Nawab of Bengal in 1765 alone. And this £6 million that they sent home does not include the trading profits the company earned, which more often than not was illegally derived. There's this interesting observation that the starting dates of Industrial Revolution in Britain coincides with the conquest of Bengal. The dynamics of British society was changing as a result of Renaissance. The rise of scientific temper led to innovation and technology. British manufacturers thus found new ways to satisfy their greed. Advancement in technology enabled them to increase production at much lower costs and earn better profits by selling their produce at cheaper rates. British manufacturers became rich in no time. Now, when all this was happening in Britain, British officials in India got hold of Bengal, which is full of resources. They used the riches and resources in Bengal to its full advantage. The bonus of gaining Bengal enabled them to fund more into industrial development in Britain, but left nothing for India. Well, this increased funding helped industrial revolution in Britain grow at a pace that no other country could catch up. So basically the conquest of Bengal and the rise of industrial revolution happened simultaneously. But at the same time, had they not gotten Bengal, industrial revolution would have been much slower for them. This massive drain of wealth in India began with these two events, that is, the industrial revolution in Britain and the conquest of Bengal. After taking control of Bengal politically in 1757, they could acquire the direct control of finances in 1765. In the period between 1757 and 1765 also, they had the control of these riches, but they had to get the Nawab's signature for it. Now, after acquiring the Diwani or the financial rights, it didn't require any such approval and directly controlled the Bengal's finances. But they never used this power to develop Bengal like how any ordinary ruler would do, not even a little. Instead, they took everything to Britain and invested it in their own industries and other personal needs. The wealth drain only kept increasing over time. After the company was abolished in 1857, India was looted directly by the British government in the form of excessive taxes, exploitative revenues, and trade policies, etc. Statistics show that nearly 6% of India's national income and 1/3 of national savings was drained out of India by the end of 19th century. Had even 1% of this been used for developing modern industries in India, today probably India would have been one of those highly developed countries in the world with very high standards of living. And maybe there wouldn't have been any reason to end the British rule in India. I mean, India did see numerous foreign invasions, right? The reason why British rule was so different is because Britishers never really mingled with Indians, nor did they consider India to be one of their own. There was always this boundary that they maintained. Their only intention was to develop their home country. Probably if modern industries and agriculture developed in India, or if Indians were able to secure jobs, then common man would never really have found a reason to revolt against the British rule. Notable economists in the likes of Dadabhai Nauroji, V.K.R.V. Rao, etc. were the first ones to make people aware of how British policies were responsible for all their miseries. In fact, the initial demand of the Indian National Congress was to make Indians have a bigger role in the Indian Parliament and not have the Britishers gone. It was only after the betrayal post-World War I and a series of unfortunate events that they took an oath of Purna Swaraj in 1929 for attaining complete independence from British Raj and became a sovereign nation. Well, the Indian leaders had some hope during the initial days of their struggle that at some point would the British consider their pleas and recognize their ability to be at an equal stature as them. However, they failed to recognize the real intent behind the British rule. It was only after all their genuine requests were outrightly rejected that they came to realize the actual intent of the British rule, thereby changing their stance during the later stages of the freedom struggle. By now, it would have become clear to you that the British imperialistic rule never really cared for the welfare of Indians. The economic policies pursued by the colonial government were more concerned with the protection and promotion of economic interests of their home country rather than development of the Indian economy. Their policies brought about a fundamental change in the structure of Indian economy. The country was transformed into a dangerous mix of both, a supplier of raw materials to feed the hungry British machines and at the same time a market for the finished goods produced by the industries from Britain. For this, Indian manufacturing was killed and the village self-sufficiency was broken. The structure of agriculture was transformed to feed the hungry British industries, leaving nothing for Indians. Hence, this twofold intention of making India into a raw material supplier and a market for Britishers allowed them to loot to the maximum. It would be entirely wrong if I would say that modern industries never really started in India. It did begin to take root in the second half of the 19th century, however, it was extremely slow. Whatever little development took place shall actually be credited to the Britishers in India. Remember about the education system I mentioned earlier, which was formulated by the British to make Indians more useful to them and for them to develop a taste of Western produce? Well, it actually ended up helping Indians gain some scientific temper and open up their minds to new ideas socially, politically, and economically. This sparked the idea of developing modern industries in India despite the unaccommodating British India policies. Cotton mills were set up in Maharashtra and Gujarat, jute mills in Bengal. Subsequently, TISCO or Tata Iron and Steel Company was set up in 1907 in Jamshedpur, which ended up in success. Few other industries here and there in the fields of sugar, cement and paper existed, but after World War II in 1947. This didn't mean that India had its own industrial revolution. These were just a few out-of-the-blue occurrences. There was no capital industry to promote further industrialization. Capital goods are basically the machines used in industries which help in production. For industrial revolution to have kicked into India, it should have had its own capital goods industry to get a hold of its latest technology and enable its own modern manufacturing. Therefore, the overall growth in Indian industries was very slow and not sufficient to replace the previous glory of India. Developing industries in India would mean Britain losing a huge market base. Hence, their policies were framed in such a way that industrial growth in India would only remain meager. But the one good thing that happened in India due to the selfish nature of the British rule is the development of infrastructure. The Britishers were able to develop a good transportation and communication infrastructure such as railways, ports, posts, and telegram. However, the real motive behind this was not to provide basic amenities to the common man, but it was to expand their imperialistic reach. British manufacturers found it a necessity to build cheap and easy system of transport in India so that their finished goods and the raw materials could flow faster at a much larger scale. They introduced steamships on rivers and improved roads. But a major breakthrough came in the 1850s when the British introduced the railways in India. It is, in fact, one of the most important contributions of the British rule in India. The railways affected the structure of Indian economy in two ways. On one hand, it enabled people to undertake long-distance travel and thereby break geographical and cultural barriers, while on the other hand, it fostered commercialization of Indian agriculture, which adversely affected the self-sufficiency of the village economy in India. The volume of India's exports no doubt expanded, but its benefits were never reaped by Indians. Using this extensive network of railways, British manufacturers wanted to get hold of the untapped markets as well as facilitate export of raw materials from interior India. The railways also helped in strengthening the British rules
by aiding faster transport of weapons and troops to diffuse revolt and suppress it as fast as they could. Although it wasn't built for the benefit of Indian people, Indians inadvertently reaped the social benefits of it. Well, the introduction of railways ended up uniting different corners of India for a common cause. Ideas, culture, and awareness spread rapidly, as now, after the Indian Railways, realized leaders could reach out to masses much quicker. It broke several barriers. Hence, in the long run, the social benefits ended up outweighing the economic losses. Another important British contribution is the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is an artificial waterway running from north to south connecting Port Said on Mediterranean Sea with the Gulf of Suez in the Red Sea. The canal provides a direct trade route for ships operating between European and American ports and ports located in South Asia, East Africa and Oceania by doing away with the need to sail around the entire African continent. Strategically and economically, it is one of the most important waterways in the world. It was built by the Britishers in 1869 to reduce the cost and time of transportation between Britain and India. Apart from transportation, the British have made a significant contribution in the field of communication by establishing an efficient postal system and introducing the telegraph. Well, again, it was introduced only so that it could enable faster communication for them, especially in cases of law and order situation across the country and not exactly for Indians. Nevertheless, just like the railways, it helped Indians spread their ideas and unite them for a common cause, that is, the freedom struggle. By the time India won its independence, the impact of the 2-century-long British rule had already sunk into the deepest roots of India. It had its worst effects on all aspects of the Indian economy. The agricultural sector was already saddled with surplus labor and extremely low productivity. The industrial sector was crying for modernization, diversification, capacity building, and increased public investment. Foreign trade was oriented to feed the Industrial Revolution in Britain, and the only good part, the infrastructure too, needed to be more oriented towards the public. There was prevalence of rampant poverty and unemployment. Data shows at the time of independence, the overall literacy level was less than 16%, and out of this, female literacy was only 7%. The overall death rate of the country was also very high. Life expectancy of an average Indian was just 32 years. India was riddled with epidemics and famines. There is no reliable data available to specify the extent of poverty at that time, but there is no doubt that extensive poverty prevailed in India during the colonial period. In a nutshell, the social and economic challenges before the country were enormous at the time of independence. Hope you found it interesting to know how the 200-year-long British rule drained wealth and resources from India and appreciate the fact that India has actually come a long way since. I mean, yes, there are still bottlenecks for India. The agricultural sector is still overcrowded and industries are only growing at an average of 16%. The services sector has become the engine of India's economic growth and has put India as one of the leading economies of the world. However, it has not been able to absorb the major lot of the Indian workforce. The sector contributes to almost 50% of India's total GDP, but only employs less than 25% of the entire Indian workforce. While these are all serious challenges, it is also important to note that India has not seen a single famine since independence despite several droughts and floods across the country. In fact, we've seen surplus production thanks to the Green Revolution. The United Nations too has recognized India for being one of the fastest countries to bring more than half of its huge population out of extensive poverty. As a matter of fact, India has a huge untapped potential in the form of its young demographics. About 67% of the total population falls in the working age group of 15 to 64 years, which is expected to expand by another 100 million by 2030. Hence, I would like to end this video by saying that India has seen a massive growth since and will continue to see more despite the several obstacles if we successfully tap into the potential of Indian youth by providing quality education, sharpening their skills, and by building an ecosystem for employment creation. This is the way forward for India's unstoppable growth. Thank you for watching this video. Before signing off, I would like to tell you to please like this video if you found it useful and share it among your friends and pass it on to as many people as possible. And comment your opinions as to what you think is the way forward for India and its unstoppable growth.